My name is Lily, and until 6 months ago, I believed there wasn't a pain worse than burying my husband. I was wrong. The worst pain wasn't losing the man I loved for 32 years. It was standing in my own kitchen while my only daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "You ruined my life, Mom. I wish Dad had divorced you years ago." Those words didn't just break my heart. They shattered every sacrifice I'd made for her. I remember staring at the coffee mug in my hands, wondering how the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders had become someone who spoke to me like I was her greatest enemy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself. But instead I stayed silent, because I knew exactly who had planted those words in her head. For years I'd promised my late husband that no matter what happened, I would protect our daughter from the ugly truth. He believed she deserved to remember him as a good father, not a deeply flawed man who made mistakes that nearly destroyed our family. So I kept every secret locked away. I accepted the blame whenever she accused me of being controlling, cold, or impossible to live with. Every birthday I spent alone, every holiday she skipped, every unanswered phone call. I carried them quietly because I believed keeping my promise mattered more than protecting my own reputation. Then everything changed after his funeral. My daughter, Emily, grew closer to her father's side of the family, especially my sister-in-law, Carol. Carol had always hated me. She smiled in public but poisoned every private conversation. Little by little, she convinced Emily that I had manipulated her father, controlled the family finances, and stolen years of happiness from him. I watched my daughter drift farther away with every visit. She stopped calling me Mom and started addressing me like I was a stranger. The woman I'd raised no longer asked for my side of the story. She had already chosen what she wanted to believe. The day Emily shouted that I had ruined my life, something inside me finally broke. Not with anger, but with clarity. I walked upstairs, opened the old cedar chest hidden in the back of my closet, and lifted out a dusty box I hadn't touched in over 20 years. Inside were letters, medical records, bank statements, and one sealed envelope written in my husband's own handwriting. My hands trembled as I brushed away the dust. Every document carried a memory I had tried to bury. Every page represented another sacrifice, another lie I had willingly carried so my daughter could grow up believing her father was the hero she adored. I had spent decades protecting a man who could no longer speak for himself, believing that silence was the greatest act of love. But all my silence had earned me was loneliness, and the hatred of the one person I loved most. I stared at the envelope with my husband's familiar handwriting across the front. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Emily. "I hope you never have to read this," he'd written. For 20 years I'd honored that wish. I believed keeping those secrets would save my family. But now my family was already falling apart. My daughter believed I was the villain. My husband's relatives had rewritten our entire history. And if I stayed silent any longer, the truth would die with me. As I held that envelope in my trembling hands, I realized the truth I'd buried for decades was the only thing that could save what was left of our family. For the first time in my life, I decided I was done being the villain in someone else's story. I didn't open the box right away. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at it as memories I had spent decades burying came rushing back. My hands shook so badly that I had to set the envelope down twice before I could breathe normally again. I wasn't afraid of the truth itself. I was afraid of what it would do to my daughter. Once she knew everything, she could never go back to believing her father was the perfect man she built up in her mind. And I wasn't sure she would ever forgive me for keeping it from her. But she had already decided I was the monster. At that point I had nothing left to lose. The first thing I pulled from the box wasn't the letter. It was a stack of faded bank statements held together with a worn rubber band. Looking at them took me back 24 years, when Emily was only 6. My husband had secretly emptied our savings account, every dollar we'd set aside for Emily's future. I remember logging into the account to pay our mortgage and seeing the balance almost gone. My heart dropped so hard I thought I was going to faint. When I confronted him, he broke down completely. He admitted he'd made reckless investments after a coworker convinced him he could double our money. Instead, he lost almost everything. Tears streamed down his face as he begged me not to tell anyone. He kept repeating that he would fix it, that Emily would never have to know, that he had simply made a terrible mistake. I believed him because I loved him. I believed protecting him was the same as protecting our family, so I did what so many wives do when they put everyone else before themselves. I stayed silent. To rebuild what had been lost, I took a second job every evening while still working full-time during the day. I sold my mother's jewelry, canceled every family holiday, and counted every penny just to keep us afloat. Emily grew up believing I was always working because I cared more about money than spending time with her. She never knew I was desperately rebuilding the future her father had accidentally destroyed. Then I found the document that hurt even more than the bank statements. It was a hospital bill with my name across the top. Emily had always believed I missed her school play because I didn't care enough to show up. Carol never missed a chance to remind everyone that I had chosen work over my own daughter. The truth was far uglier. That same afternoon, after nearly 18 hours of working between two jobs, I collapsed from exhaustion. I woke up in an emergency room with an 4 in my arm while my husband sat beside me, crying and begging me not to tell Emily why I had pushed myself so hard. Let her hate me for being busy, I whispered. She never has to know what really happened. Looking back now, I realized every secret I kept to protect him became another brick in the wall separating me from my daughter. Every sacrifice I made was rewritten as proof that I didn't love her. And as I dug deeper into that forgotten box, I realized the truth had been buried long enough. If Emily was ever going to understand who I really was, every painful secret had to come into the light. The last thing left in the box was the sealed envelope with my husband's handwriting across the front. It simply read, "For Lily. Only if Emily ever hates you because of me." I stared at those words for a long time before breaking the seal. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rain tapping against my bedroom window. As I unfolded the pages, it felt as though my husband was sitting beside me again, speaking directly to me after all these years. His letter began with an apology I had waited decades to hear. He admitted that I had carried burdens that should have been his alone. He confessed that every time Emily thought I was the strict parent, it was because he had asked me to take the blame. Whenever I canceled something or said no to another expense, I was protecting the family from debts he had hidden. He even admitted that Carol had known about his financial mistakes for years. But instead of helping us, she encouraged him to keep lying because she believed I would eventually leave him. When I didn't, her resentment toward me only grew stronger. Then I reached the paragraph that made me stop breathing. My husband confessed that, during one of the darkest periods of our marriage, he had seriously considered leaving us. He had packed a suitcase, rented a small apartment, and even met with a divorce lawyer. But before signing the papers, he came home and found Emily asleep on my lap while I sat at the kitchen table paying bills with tears streaming down my face. In that moment, he realized I wasn't the reason our family was falling apart. He was. He canceled the apartment the very next morning and spent the rest of his life trying to become a better husband and father. But despite all his efforts, he never found the courage to tell Emily the truth. I wiped away my tears as I finished the final page. At the bottom, he had written one sentence that changed everything. "If our daughter ever believes her mother destroyed this family, promise me you'll let her read this. She deserves the truth more than she deserves my perfect memory." For years, I believed keeping his secrets was an act of love. Now I understood that silence had become a prison. Carol hadn't destroyed my relationship with Emily on her own. My silence had given her room to rewrite our family's history until my own daughter believed I was the villain. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I picked up the phone and called Emily. When she answered, I said quietly, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking for 1 hour. 1 hour to tell you the truth your father wanted you to know. After that, if you decide never to see me again, I'll accept your decision." There was a long silence. Then I heard her whisper, "1 hour, Mom." As the call ended, I looked down at my husband's letter. For the first time in years, I knew the truth would finally have a chance to set us free. Emily almost didn't come. She texted me 3 different times to cancel, and each message hurt more than the last. By the time she finally agreed to meet, I wasn't sure if she was coming for answers or simply to say goodbye. We met at the small cafe where I used to take her for hot chocolate after school. Back then, she'd run through the door with a smile and throw her arms around me. This time, she walked in without even looking happy to see me. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, her expression guarded. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I was doing. She simply sat down and said, "Say whatever you need to say. I only have an hour." I nodded without arguing. Instead, I slid the old wooden box across the table. "Before you say another word," I whispered, "I need you to look inside." Emily rolled her eyes, convinced it was just another excuse. But as she lifted the lid, her confidence began to fade. Inside were faded bank statements, hospital records, old receipts, and finally a sealed envelope with her father's handwriting across the front. The moment she saw his signature, all the anger disappeared from her face. She recognized it instantly. For the next 20 minutes, the cafe seemed to disappear around us. She read every page in complete silence. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. Several times she covered her mouth, trying to hold back her emotions. Then she reached the final letter, her father's confession. As she read his words admitting that I had spent years protecting him, her hands began to tremble. When she reached his final request, asking me to tell the truth if Emily ever blamed me for destroying our family, she completely broke down. Emily looked up with red, swollen eyes. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Why?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" It was the question I had imagined 1,000 times. I reached across the table but stopped just short of taking her hand. "Because I loved your father," I said softly. "And I loved you even more. I believed protecting your memories would protect your heart. I never imagined my silence would make you believe I never loved you." Emily buried her face in her hands and cried harder than I had ever seen. Between sobs, she admitted that Carol had spent months poisoning her mind after the funeral. Every conversation painted me as cold, selfish, and uncaring. At first, Emily doubted the stories. But because I never defended myself, she slowly convinced herself they had to be true. Carol had counted on one thing, that I would keep my promise and stay silent forever. As I watched my daughter finally see the truth, I realized something that changed everything. My revenge was never going to come from humiliating Carol or proving I was right. Real revenge didn't need shouting, insults, or public humiliation. The greatest revenge was allowing the truth to quietly destroy every lie that had been built against me. In that small cafe, with my daughter's tears washing away years of deception, I knew the final chapter of our story had already begun. And this time, the truth would speak louder than any lie ever could. A week after our meeting, Emily called and asked if she could come over. This time, when I opened the door, she didn't hesitate. She rushed into my arms and held me so tightly that it felt as if she were trying to make up for every year we'd spent apart. Then she broke down, crying like the little girl who used to run to me after a bad dream. I held her without saying a word. Some wounds aren't healed by speeches or perfect apologies. They begin to heal the moment the truth finally has room to breathe. She stayed the entire afternoon. Together, we opened the old box once again. We looked through faded family photographs, laughed at memories we'd almost forgotten, and cried over letters that had carried the weight of secrets for decades. For the first time in years, we spoke honestly, without anger, without blame, without fear. As the sun began to set, Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes and quietly asked, "Mom, why didn't you tell me all this before?" I smiled sadly and answered, "Because I thought protecting your father would protect you too. I never imagined my silence would make you believe I didn't love you." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered the 4 words I'd waited more than 20 years to hear. "Mom, I'm so sorry." In that moment, a burden I'd carried for most of my life finally lifted. My daughter wasn't just hearing my story. She was seeing me again. The next step belonged to Emily. A few days later, she met with Carol and calmly placed her father's handwritten letter on the table beside the legal documents and old records. She didn't raise her voice or argue. She simply asked one question. "Why did you spend so many years making me hate my own mother?" Carol tried to deny everything, but every excuse collapsed under the evidence. One by one, the relatives who had believed her version of events finally realized how easily they'd accepted lies without ever asking for my side. Carol's influence disappeared, not because anyone sought revenge against her, but because truth has a way of exposing every lie that stands in its path. Today, Emily comes to my house every Sunday. We cook dinner together, laugh over old family stories, and create new memories we once thought we'd never have. We still miss her father, and we remember the good parts of the man he was, but we no longer pretend he was perfect. Loving someone doesn't mean rewriting history. It means accepting every part of the truth, even the painful ones. If my story has taught me anything, it's this: silence may protect someone for a little while, but it can also protect the lies that slowly destroy your life. I believed keeping the truth hidden was an act of loyalty. Instead, it almost cost me the one person I loved most, my daughter. The day I finally chose honesty, I didn't just clear my name. I gave Emily the chance to know the mother who had loved her every single day, even when she believed the worst about me. And in the end, that became the greatest revenge of all. Not watching someone else lose everything, but finally getting my family back.